Let's have ourselves a Friday, my friends. It's the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips today. Won't have any extended guests today. I know the last few days I had my man Jack Veltri in studio with me for the last half of the show. We had Alan Cole in at the last half of the show yesterday. We're gonna spread it out a little bit more today. Got two guests. One here at 3:30. My friend Joe Rexroad from The Athletic is going to be joining us. He is currently in the car on his way fighting the wintry, icy conditions of South Bend, Indiana, where he is going to be at the Notre Dame-Indiana game, also known as the first ever on-campus college football playoff game. He'll be experiencing that. He'll be covering it for The Athletic. I'll have him on the phone so we can talk about that game, some other college football playoff matchups, some other big news in college football, maybe even get into the Diego Pavia thing with him because that's certainly created some reaction. Now, Steve Sarkisian, head coach at Texas, isn't necessarily a fan of that, and I certainly can see why. He makes a good point. We'll get into that as well. At 4:30, Jordan Kay from the State is going to join me by phone. We're going to talk a little bit about this Citrus Bowl coming up, maybe breaking down the matchup between South Carolina and Illinois now that we are 11 days away from the Gamecocks in their pursuit of getting win number 10, a feat that has only been achieved 4 times and has not happened since Steve Spurrier was the head coach. So they're looking to make a little bit of history in the Citrus Bowl as well. So I'll talk to Jordan coming up in the next hour about that. So many storylines in college football right now between the playoff, between the transfer portal, Diego Pavia suing the NCAA. There's a whole lot to get into, but we'll get into a little bit of the Gamecocks here to start off the show. And, of course, still taking your calls and texts. The phone lines are working today. Thankfully, we have gotten that fixed. But if you would like to call or leave a text talking about Gamecock Larry, we're going to be celebrating the life of Gamecock Larry all throughout the show as well. So I'll keep doing kind of what I did yesterday, going back to the Firehouse Subs text line. And today I'll be able to take some calls too, so we can be a little more flexible. And, of course, it is just me in the studio today. So full disclosure, it's just me in the studio behind the glass. I'm operating the soundboard. There's just one set of hands back here and me talking. So if you call and you don't get an answer, I don't pick up the phone, just wait till the commercial break and then I'll be able to answer it because I can't answer your phone call and be on air at the same time. If I can do that one day, then I can solve myself some problems on days where I'm by myself, but I can't do that right now. But one day, I'll be able to. And I'm still working on cloning myself so I can be multiple places at once. Also another thing that would solve just a lot of my problems. And I'm sure it could solve a lot of yours too. Very relatable. But I don't think we're going to be able to achieve that one anytime soon. But nonetheless, we'll go ahead and get started right now. I'll give you a little bowl update too. Ohio up on Jacksonville State 27-14. Tyler Huff having a great day for Jacksonville State, already thrown for 200-plus yards, couple touchdowns, but Ohio's still up 27-14 going into the fourth quarter. This is one of my favorite things about bowl season is that you do get games that kick off at like noon on a Thursday or Friday, right? You do get a lot of those daytime bowl games, and today's one of those. So I'm very excited about that. I love just being able to do my job and have college football on in the background. Kind of like the same thing during Thanksgiving, when you have feast week and you just put basketball games on in the background. Sports are awesome. But we'll go ahead and start off with the Gamecocks Bowl discussion because there is some news today, and there's some really good news regarding South Carolina and the pursuit of win number 10. And that's the news that Nick Emenwari, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, Tonka Hemingway, all opting in. Not out. Opting in. Man. In an era in which we see a lot of players opt out, and Carolina's already got one opt out in Kyle Kennard, but you got a few key defensive players who more than likely will not be back next year. Now, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, Tonka Hemingway, those guys are out of eligibility, right? So if they would like to play one more game of college football, they kind of have to play in this one. And Nick Emenwari, not a senior, still has eligibility left, but I think the consensus is that he's going to play or declare for the NFL draft eventually. and maybe not play for South Carolina next year. Because look, the work he has done to boost his draft stock in this year alone has propelled him to potentially a first-round pick. I have seen mock drafts. Now, we're not yet reached the epitome of silly mock draft season. We're still about 2 months away before that happens. Or usually the day after the Super Bowl is when you start seeing them all start firing off. But at any given time, there's like 8 of them on CBS Sports. And throughout the football season, Nick Emenwari was at least a first-rounder in one of them. Mel Kiper Jr. has him as the number 2 safety in this draft class. So it would make sense to assume or maybe hypothesize that Nick Emenwari is going to put his name in the NFL draft because he's going to make him some really good money, and rightfully so. He's had a phenomenal year. But for now, there's still work to be done. And he's still going to be playing in a South Carolina Gamecock uniform on December 31st at 3 o'clock Eastern Time down in Orlando when the Gamecocks take on Illinois. And I love that for him. I love this for South Carolina. I love this for college football, too. And this isn't trying to disparage the decision Kyle Kennard made or the one that Rocket Sanders will ultimately have to make because he's declared for the draft, too. I have not read anything about the word that if he'll be playing or not. And even if he does, let's just say he declares for the draft, too. This isn't official, but let's just say he does. I'm not holding any ill will towards either of those men. They're making decisions for their family, for them, for their draft stock, and that's okay. That's totally fine. And I don't want that to be lost upon anybody, that's okay too. But it is exciting when somebody or a group of players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, realize what's at stake and want to be a part of it, right? And Demetrius Knight wants to be a part of it. I was reading through Jack Veltri and David Cloninger tweets talking about or kind of, keeping us posted about what's happening in their press availability today. And Demetrius Knight mentioning, this is an example that he wants to set for his kids that you finish what you start. Respect that. It's a really respectable take. And I'm excited to be able to cover this game because I know exactly what it means for the university. And I know exactly what this means for bowl games like the Citrus Bowl. You want as many star players playing as possible. Now in modern college football in 2024, and this will be the same way in 2025 and in 2026 and 2027, it's never going to get back to what it was where you're getting the entirety of the roster playing for the school in the bowl game because of the transfer portal, because of not wanting to get hurt or to risk injury before the NFL draft. Totally get it. And I totally get that bowl games will never mean what they used to in its entirety, but there's still a way to find meaning. There was one text yesterday that I can't remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the texter. It kind of got lost in the flood of text messages we read throughout the show. Kind of talking about the game still meaning nothing. I beg to differ. The game means something. It may not mean as much nationally. It may not mean as much to, let's just say, I'm throwing a random school out here, the Nebraska fan who has nothing to do on New Year's Eve but loves college football and is watching. It may not mean as much to them still, but it means a lot to the South Carolina fan base. It means a lot to the Citrus Bowl itself. It means a lot to the Southeastern Conference to try to puff their chests whenever it comes to beating the Big Ten, who is their biggest business competitor. It does mean something in that regard. These are the same two conferences that are dueling out TV deals. This is the same conference in the SEC that decided to agree to that documentary series deal with Netflix because if they pass on it, that would mean the Big Ten has the next dibs. And you'd rather not have your competitor have that platform. Bowl season can kind of mean the same thing. There's a lot of pride on the line even for the conferences. So this would mean something for the SEC if South Carolina were to go out there and do what I think they do, and that's lay the lumber on Illinois. Again, Nick Emenwari, Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams will all be playing for South Carolina in this game. Pretty much the defense sounds like they'll all be coming back minus Kyle Kennard. Now, that's a big loss because Kyle Kennard has been fantastic this year. Clearly, he's the Nagurski Award winner. By many account, he is the best defensive player in college football this year. And you can't have many statistical arguments against that. So anytime you lose it, you're not getting better. but you're not falling off a cliff defensively either. They still have some pretty talented players like JT Gear, Desmond Umeozulu, Brian Thomas that are still going to take their cracks at playing at that edge position in this game and can potentially help you out and help you win this game. So these guys, playing this game allows them to put a bow on a special season. Proves that these games aren't completely meaningless. But most importantly right now, with just the news, this is really one of the first things that popped into my head when I saw that Nick Emenwari, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, Tonka Hemingway are all playing. It told me that South Carolina officially won the war of the opt-outs in this game against Illinois in the Citrus Bowl, because Illinois' leading receiver, Pat Bryant, opted out of the game. Illinois doesn't have a ton of weapons. Luke Altmaier at quarterback has been very improved. I love his touchdown-interception ratio, 21-6. I love a quarterback that can put the ball in the end zone and away from the other team's filthy mittens. And that's what he's done a pretty good job of this year. And for a guy who spent his entire career as a backup at Ole Miss, was his first-year starter at Illinois last year and really took some lumps. Had a really impressive year this year. And it's not like you like to see that in college football for quarterbacks, to find a place where they can grow a little bit. Luke Altmaier grew a little bit at Illinois this season, but he's going to have his work cut out for him, because if you go on Pro Football Focus and you look at all the grades for the units of Illinois' offense, the worstly graded aspects of their offense are run blocking and pass blocking. And that pass blocking unit still has to line up against Dylan Stewart. They still have to line up in the interior against Boogie Huntley, against Debo Williams from linebacker, maybe blitzing, Demetrius Knight, Tonka Hemingway. They still have to protect maybe a blitz from Nick Emenwari. This is a tough ask for an Illinois offensive line who's had some ups and downs this year. But I think they're going to be able to feast on this line, South Carolina is, and really make Luke Altmaier have to avoid putting the ball in harm's way. He hasn't done it a lot this year, but I will say, according to Pro Football Focus, Luke Altmaier's turnover-worthy pass percentage is a little higher, not much higher, a little higher than his big-time throw percentage whenever he is pressured. So 5.7% of his passes when he's pressured are considered turnover-worthy plays. 5.6% of his passes when he's pressured were considered big-time throws. And he was pressured on almost 40% of his dropbacks. So there's opportunity there to really wreak some havoc for the South Carolina defense. I think my favorite thing about this, too, is there was a tweet from David Cloninger. I don't have it pulled up right now, but just kind of alluding to this from what I read earlier, that some players mentioned that they don't want to be like Florida State. They don't want to handle missing out on the college football playoff the same way Florida State handled missing out on the college football playoff. And I talked about this last week, and I broke this down with Jack Veltri pretty extensively, that Florida State and how they handled their rejection from the college football playoff and how they went to the Orange Bowl and gotten beaten over the head with a bag of hammers for 4 quarters and just really didn't show up against Georgia. They lost 63-3. And then that type of butt kicking lingered over the offseason. That dejection for missing the playoffs lingered over the offseason. It changed their working habits, and ultimately it turned what was a 13-0 season before that bowl game into a 2-10 season the next year, even when they added a lot of talented transfers in the portal. Things can change like that in college football. So keeping momentum from one year to the next is mightily important, and I think the South Carolina football team understands that, and they might be using Florida State as a cautionary tale. We'll get into more of that, and also on the other side, Shane Beamer is doing something with a player that's in the transfer portal for South Carolina that I think sets a fantastic example for college football. I'll tell you what that is when the postgame show continues. College football has changed a lot over the years. About 10 years ago, preparing for a bowl game in December, it was significantly different than preparing for a bowl game or even the college football playoff in December now, or preparing to play on the road for a true road game in a college football playoff game. It's a lot different. Coaches deal with different stuff, and the transfer portal and NIL really are the two things that are talked about ad nauseum, whether it be on shows like this, national programs, or even hearing press conferences where coaches speak. You're constantly having to re-recruit your roster to talk guys to stay. You're constantly having to watch film and evaluate other players who have entered the transfer portal and then schedule visits and then try to get commits and then try to get your roster ready for next year. Oh, yeah, while you're still preparing for a bowl game, like what South Carolina is doing right now. A part of that is managing the players that are in the portal that are leaving your team. And one particular South Carolina Gamecock's in an interesting position, and that's Robbie Ashford. Robbie Ashford was a quarterback coming out of high school, highly touted as a high school football prospect, one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the nation when he was a high school senior. Went to go play at Oregon, never really cracked the field, transferred to Auburn for an opportunity, saw some action, and got to play at Auburn for a little bit, despite it being some really turbulent years towards the end of the Brian Harsin era and the introduction to Hugh Freeze to the program. And he wanted an opportunity. And I feel like he feels like he didn't get enough of an opportunity when Hugh Freeze took that job. That it was almost predetermined that when Hugh Freeze took that job, Robbie Ashford was no longer going to be the quarterback at Auburn. So he comes here for the chance to compete for the starting job against Lenoris. And Lenoris, as we see over the course of the last few months, has grown into an exceptional quarterback who already has a highlight reel that is one of the more entertaining college football highlight reels of any South Carolina quarterback to ever play. That's how impressive he was this last month. So the writing's on the wall that Lenoris Sellers is going to be the starting quarterback for South Carolina next year. Robbie Ashford still has a year of eligibility. He still would like to, be a starting quarterback somewhere. Totally get it. But he wants to be able to finish out this season with this team because he does like it here. He's respected here, and he enjoys this team and the camaraderie he has with his teammates and wants one more round to be able to put a stamp on this season and be a part of history, that same history that I talked about in the first segment, where you can get 10 wins in a season. It's still significant, and it still means something. Shane Beamer was asked in the press conference the other day. I've been waiting for a good time to play this clip because Shane was asked about Robbie Ashford still practicing. I think it was Jordan Kay, who I'm going to have on at 4:30 today. I think it was him who asked the question. And if he's even just still here practicing, Shane said yes. And then Jordan followed up with, can you talk me through, I guess, why you're allowing Robbie Ashford to still practice with the team and play for him despite him being in the transfer portal? It's a long cut, so bear with me, but I thought Shane did a really good job of elaborating on why a player that's in the transfer portal is still playing on this team, planning to play in the bowl game and also practice in preparation for it.
I'd say it's a little bit of a change because I've had some guys ask me to do that in the past, and I wouldn't let them because you're either with us or you're not. In regards to Robbie, I think each situation is specific, Jordan. And look, Robbie loves it here, and Robbie's enjoyed his experience here. Robbie wants to be the starting quarterback. I get that, and he should be. And there's only one of those guys on the field. So Robbie came and talked to me the week after the Clemson game about, his future, doesn't want to go, loves it here, but also understands we've got a pretty good quarterback right now in Lenoris. And I would love for Robbie to stay, but I want Robbie to get a chance to be a quarterback somewhere. And we talked about how to best handle it. And I would love to say, don't announce you're going in the portal until right after the game and then go in the portal. But that's probably not the best thing for him, because teams in like college football, they're only going to take one quarterback, and he's got to be in the portal for teams to legally talk to him or for him to go on visits. So I didn't want to prevent him from being able to find his next home over the month of December and have other schools fill up that would take him. So he and I talked about it. And then we agreed to meet later on. So we met later on. He decided, yes, I want to go in the portal. I'd like to do it now. And then initially I went back and forth. I'm not going to lie. But then I met with the leaders on the team. And I said, here's what we've done in the past. What are your thoughts on this? That he wants to stay and finish. He's a play away from being in the bowl game. He wants to finish this thing the right way. He started with you guys. It's a little bit different than a backup receiver that wants to go in the portal just because he wants to get more playing time or more money or whatever. This is a guy that is there's only one of them on the field, and there's only a few places that are taking quarterbacks right now. And I met with the leaders, and they were all in agreement. Let him finish. That he started this thing with us. He's been a good teammate, and let him go out the right way. So we've worked a schedule around it. He was on a visit last weekend when we were off. He's on a visit right now. And I told him he needed to be back tomorrow night because we've got 3 really important practices coming up this weekend as well. So I think each situation is different. Quarterback is a unique position because they only take one. And he's done things the right way here. But I've told him, too, that, and I told the team yesterday in front of Robbie, that if we go through this process and over the next few days I sense anything that he's not being a great teammate or isn't completely committed, then we're going to have a different conversation. But I don't think that's going to happen.
So there it is. Robbie Ashford's earned the right to be able to continue playing with this team right now, and it's a tough position for quarterbacks. I mean, we have just seen at Penn State, Bo Pribula, the backup quarterback for Penn State, who plays a lot still. I mean, he still gets about 7 or 8 snaps a game in packages because he's a little more mobile than Drew Aller is. So you see him come into the games, on maybe 3rd or 4th and shorts to convert first downs. And can be a part of that offense. He's already in the transfer portal because teams need to know what their quarterback situation is right now before they even get into spring practice. Which is why Malik Murphy made the same decision last year at Texas, because he knew he wasn't going to be the starting quarterback. Even though he knew that if Quinn Ewers was one big hit away, he would have to play in a college football playoff game against Washington. Still, teams like Duke, who didn't have a quarterback, were quarterback shopping in December, and they were going to make sure they knew who their guy was whenever spring practice started. And you can't do that unless you're not able to enroll. So it's a tough situation. I do really appreciate that Shane Beamer is letting him play this game. He is letting him practice with his teammates for the final times, because now their days together are limited. They are numbered. Shoot, the season is officially over in 11 days. And Robbie Ashford still deserves a chance to be able to start somewhere. I'm not maybe in the best position to ever give advice to college kids, but if I'm a college athlete, the best one I can give you is go where you're going to play and where you're going to be seen playing. Go where you're going to have an opportunity to be able to display your talents. Get in the game. And I'm really hoping Robbie's going to be able to do that at a place, or be able to go to a place where he is going to get the snaps and he can maximize his collegiate career and be able to end his eligibility with one season where he is the guy in the starter. I have all the confidence in the world he'll find a landing spot to be able to do that. Unfortunately for him, it's just not here. But I do appreciate Shane Beamer and the coaching staff and even his teammates, because it was up to them too, to let him stay. And I think that, even with all the changes in college football, that is a positive change. That is something that I think can still be applauded. We'll take a quick break right here. Going to hop on the phone. Here in the next segment, my man Joe Rexrode from The Athletic will be covering Indiana Notre Dame tonight for that publication. He is fighting the wintry weather right now, and we're going to get the latest from that game, the rest of the playoff, and more from the world of college football with Joe Rexrode when the postgame show returns. Tonight, we're making college football history. Tonight is the first ever college football playoff game played on campus, and that campus is on the campus of South Bend, Indiana, at Notre Dame. And my man Joe Rexrode from The Athletic is currently in a vehicle fighting the icy, wintry conditions to be able to attend this historic event for The Athletic. Joe, thanks for joining me. And, I mean, if I would have told you 10 years ago that you would be driving through snow to cover a college football game that is part of a college football playoff that didn't just involve Notre Dame, but also Indiana, what type of drugs did you think I'd be on?
Yeah, probably some pretty intense ones, especially probably the Indiana part especially. Expanded playoff, home playoff games, all that stuff. I used to cover a lot of games at this stadium when I was on the Michigan State beat. So 10 years ago, I would have been on that still. But yeah, the Indiana part especially is forget 10 years ago. Tell me this 6 months ago, and I'm making you submit a urine test. It's just really wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the weird thing about this playoff too, is that it has produced the controversies. I'll put some of them in air quotes, and as well as some of the storylines it's produced. I mean, certainly good for the sport, I feel like, just because they're in the national spotlight. I think this is probably the most prominent that we've ever talked about a college football playoff bracket ever, because it's a large one this time, and you're actually filling it out. It's more than 4 spots. But we are discussing teams like SMU, Boise State, Indiana, Arizona State, all having a chance to play for a national title. How do you think this is kind of going in the first year of the sport now, since you've been covering it so closely, and being able to kind of see this whole experiment unfold in year one?
Yeah, look, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's been an incredible year. I think a lot of the criticisms or concerns about the 12-team playoff, in my mind, have been debunked. I also think we've seen some of the things that need to be tweaked. I do think like seeding the field without the the automatic top 4 for the conference champions. I think that's something that probably needs to be dealt with. I also think, Elijah, after this weekend when we watch these home site atmospheres, and then next week when we get into bowl games for quarterfinals for the top 4 seeds, I think there's going to be a lot more people saying, well, this makes no sense. I mean, what are we doing here? So there's stuff that needs to be fixed. And I know, I'm talking to people in SEC country, and so I know that people are upset about, SMU in as opposed to, one of those 3 SEC teams that could have gotten in. But, look, I think that process can always be more transparent, can be better. I think that if you're going to do the weekly updates based on those, then I don't think there was a justification to drop SMU out behind any of those teams. So I think if you really did do a fresh resume thing, I mean, my team that I would have had in there actually would have been Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. But regardless, you could make a case for South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Alabama. But so I mean, I think that if they're going to do it this way, I think that they actually got it less wrong than they would have by going with one of the SEC teams. But it's great. Like you said, look, I mean, it's just out of nowhere that an Arizona State wins the Big 12. It's out of nowhere that an Indiana goes 11-1. And certainly some of these teams, this is going to happen every year. Some teams, some years are going to get easier conference schedules than other teams, right? Mm-hmm. It's just how it's going to happen. It did happen for Indiana this year. But I also think that like the way they played football on a weekly basis, I think they deserve to be in this thing. Tonight, if they win or come close, and a lot of people are going to say, see, I told you this team was good. If they get blown off the field, then we can start screaming all over again about how they were just a product of an easy schedule.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going to lead, or this leads me to right now, is tonight's game is going to be very fascinating. I mean, Notre Dame suffered the worst loss of any team that's in this field right now, losing to Northern Illinois, and that was back on September 7th, which feels like it was September 7th of 2020 with how long ago it feels like. But ever since then, Notre Dame's just taken a sledgehammer to every team they've played, and this defense for Notre Dame looks really impressive. My biggest hang-up is I don't know how Indiana's going to score enough points to be able to win this thing.
I'm totally with you. I don't think it's a great matchup for Indiana. And, again, I think I think Indiana's better off playing a team with a better offense than a defense, because I do think Indiana's defense is legitimately good. Like, they've got, I mean, look, some of those James Madison guys, Mikhail Kamara and Aiden Fisher, those guys are all Big Ten players. I mean, they're legitimately good. Yeah, so I think that, like, Indiana's defense can hang in a lot of matchups in this field, but they'd be better off against, like an Arizona State maybe, or like a team with a little bit more off. I just think you saw with Ohio State, Indiana couldn't block Ohio State. Indiana couldn't really block Michigan in the second half of that game, and that's my question tonight. You don't really have a mobile quarterback in Curtis Rourke. He's a terrific QB if you give him time, but can they give him time? Can they manufacture any run game at all? I do think that I would expect this one to be kind of on the lower scoring end. I think both defenses can keep the score down.
Certainly, and of course, you've covered Tennessee a lot this year. That's a matchup that I think is probably the most intriguing here in these first round of games. I think that's the one upset this weekend, and it can be tough to see exactly Tennessee scoring more than 21 points against this Ohio State team, but given Ohio State's offensive line and Tennessee's defensive front, part of me is inching towards picking Tennessee, and I have picked Tennessee to win this game, and I think there's got to be at least one upset this weekend. I feel like that might be the one.
Yeah, I certainly like that as a strong possibility. The two that I think are most likely, I think SMU really does have a shot. I really do. SMU can stop the run, and obviously Penn State ran wild on Oregon, but I think SMU's defense actually can have a decent game against what Penn State does, and that they're dynamic. They let that game get away from them early against Clemson. They just completely screwed up the early stages of that game, and I think you kind of saw as the game went on how dangerous they can be. But I'm with you. I think Tennessee has a real chance. It's so much about intangibles in that game, right? It's like, so I'm here covering this game. I'm staying with family in Chicago, including my Ohio answer, like, how excited she is for this game. It's like, I don't care about this game at all. The season's over. We lost to Michigan.
Wow.
And that's seriously like how so many Ohio State fans feel, which I think is going to result in about 30,000 Tennessee fans in the stands, for one thing. And also, it's just a really weird situation. They don't want Ryan Day as their coach anymore. They got a chance they could make a run and win it all. But
still, yeah,
get over all of that stuff, and that's where I think Tennessee might just get them right out of the gate here.
I think so too. And my thing is, if Nico can connect on just one or two deep balls to really open it up and keep that box light for Dylan Sampson, Dylan Sampson's going to be able to get what he wants, and Tennessee can really dictate the clock there. That's my one big thing with Tennessee, though, is can Nico actually kind of grow up in this game and in this environment, because they're going to space the field out. You're going to have, Tennessee's only faced like a stacked box in like 24% of their snaps. You're going to have to be able to connect on a couple of those deep shots on the outside.
Exactly. What they do dictates, obviously it makes defenses declare what they're going to do. It dictates usually a lighter box, like you said, but you got to be able to connect. There's always opportunity. And Ohio State, you know what Ohio State's going to do. They're going to they've got pros all through the secondary. They're going to man up. They're going to and Georgia has had success doing that against Tennessee, but I think Dante Thornton is the guy who can get behind people, and Nico's got to connect. And if he hits even one of those, I think that might be the difference.
And Clemson and Texas. You got to see Texas a lot this year. We're very familiar with what Clemson does here in South Carolina. Do you think Clemson has much of a chance? I know the quarterback matchup is a rematch of a great Texas high school quarterback matchup from a few years ago. How do you see that one playing out?
Yeah, I think I like Texas to win comfortably. That'd be my pick. I don't know about a total blowout. Clemson has, a good defense. Klubnik can make some big plays. I just don't think that they're going to be able to line up and run Moffitt, Texas, and although Texas, Quinn Ewers, I'm a little, like the SEC title game, I'm a little shaky, on them at times and how they go into a funk. I just feel like they're going to find enough big plays in this game, and that Texas defense, I think when they play their best, I think that could be as good a unit as there is in the playoffs, as far as talent. And then when they really, so I just feel like at home, that's one of those where home field should mean a lot.
Definitely. Joe, I appreciate you for your time. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy that little bit of history that you're getting to experience tonight.
Will do. Thanks, Elijah. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, as always, my guy Joe Rexrode from The Athletic. He'll be at Indiana Notre Dame covering that event for them. I'll come back on the other side, give you my take on a couple of those games as college football playoff starts tonight in South Bend. And of course, if you heard one of our imaging during that commercial break, we are still remembering our friend Gamecock Larry, who passed away yesterday morning. Tons of tributes here on our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Kyle on our text line says, RIP Gamecock Larry. He's throwing passes and trash, talking Clem sucks with Gamecock great Kenny McKinley. Got another text here. This is in regards to Gamecock Larry, what he would say about this Citrus Bowl coming up. And that is, as Gamecock Larry would say, we need to take Illinois to the woodshed. And I love it that all these players are playing. Nameless texture there. I completely agree. I'm really excited that these guys are playing. For those who missed my first segment, Nick Emenwari, Bookie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, and Tonka Hemingway all mentioned today that they are going to be playing here in the Citrus Bowl. I know Gamecock Larry would have absolutely loved that. And then, of course, at the beginning of the show, we got a text from Scott. It says, this is Scott. I'm going to miss the Gamecock Larry phone calls. I used to love it when you call in and raise hell about Mark Kingston. He did kind of call his shot there, Gamecock Larry did, when talking about Mark Kingston and maybe his days being numbered. And, yeah, ultimately, he did get fired, and he got to live to see Paul Maneri get hired for South Carolina. And I know Gamecock Larry had been, was incredibly enthusiastic about that hire, as a lot of people are in Gamecock Nation. So if you still have any other memories, any stories, any shout-outs you'd like to give to Gamecock Larry, text line, Firehouse Subs text line, still very much open, 803-404-6100. And the phone lines are working as well. So thankfully, those are good to go. So just call in if you have anything to say in regards to Gamecock Larry, and we'll keep doing this throughout the show, kind of like what we did yesterday as well. Talking about the college football playoff, though, obviously, I had my man Joe on, Joe Rexroad, who is, follow him at Joe Rexroad on Twitter. He'll be giving some good updates tonight while he's at Indiana Notre Dame, and that is a massive, massive game because it's history. It's the first ever on-campus college football playoff game. It's snowing there right now, but it should be, from what Joe is telling me off air. We were talking back and forth a little bit before the segment started. To his understanding, it's going to be a little drier in the afternoon, so maybe we're not going to get that cool snow flurry game like we saw in the Steelers-Browns game earlier this season on Thursday Night Football, where we seemingly just had a blizzard break out in the middle of Cleveland. So you're not going to see that, but it did snow last night in South Bend, and there's definitely some snow on the ground. It's going to be bitter and cold, but I think we're going to have a really good football game right there. I'm really high on Notre Dame. Full disclosure, I think Notre Dame plays Oregon in the national championship game. I think Notre Dame beats Georgia because without Carson Beck, I don't really see Georgia engineering enough points to win that game, and I think Notre Dame's offense is opportunistic enough. Georgia can be run on, and if there's anything Notre Dame's offense does really well, it's, run the football. Notre Dame does that really, really well. Interesting game. I think they'll cruise against Indiana tonight. I like Indiana as a team. A great story. I'm like Joe. I just think it's a really bad matchup. The one thing that might be super intriguing to me is that I think Clemson might have a better chance against Texas than SMU does against Penn State. As crazy as that may sound, because SMU is starting to become a little more of the trendier upset pick, I don't know if SMU is able to stop Penn State. And I know Texas is going to be able to get whatever they want on Clemson in terms of moving the ball up and down the field, because Texas has done a really good job at moving the ball up and down the field on everyone they've played this season. But the problem's not Texas getting the ball from one 20-yard line to the other 20-yard line. It's what they do once they get to the other 20-yard line. And Quinn Ewers at times has looked like a surgeon in terms of being able to move up and down the field and really bend this offense to his will. But once they get inside the 20, things really start to break down. If Clemson's defense, which has a really high ceiling, tightens up down in the red zone and forces Texas to settle for field goals, that one might get hairier than we think. Hairier enough for me to second guess me picking Texas to cover the 12 on Wild Card Showdown from a few days ago. I'm thinking about it. Can't go back now, but I'm thinking about it. Hour number 2 coming up next. Hour number 2 of the postgame show starts right now. I'm Elijah Campbell, no Jay Phillips this afternoon. Heading into a very busy football weekend. College football playoff starts tonight. Actually, College Game Day on ESPN just started. They're on the campus in Notre Dame for the first ever on-campus college football playoff game, which is going to look kind of weird in its own right. As I have all these papers fall down. If you're watching on our YouTube stream, I just got hit with an avalanche of papers. Love that for myself. All right, I think we're all fixed up there. But that's tonight. Some other bowl games going on. To give you an update, Ohio wins our first bowl game of the day. If you had Ohio winning the Cure Bowl in your bowl pick'em pool, congratulations, you're a winner. I know I did. They beat Jacksonville State today by a score of 30-27. I wonder if people still do bracket or bowl pools, right? I know it's still an option on ESPN because there's the Capital One Bowl Mania, and I love that. I've been doing bowl pick'em pools since I was about 8 years old. I love picking bowl games and trying to defeat my family members and friends in friendly competition. I won my bowl pick'em pool last year, and I rode that high for an entire year, right? I've dragged my girlfriend into playing it this year for the first time, losing to her, by the way. Funny enough. I'm a game behind. Ohio did me no good today because we actually picked them too. But do people still do that? Text in our text line, our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Do you still enjoy playing bowl pick'em pools, even now that we have an expanded playoff? Because we don't have a bracket challenge per se, right? We don't have an ESPN bowl or a football playoff bracket challenge like you do with the NCAA basketball tournament. Men's and women's. Love doing both of those every year, too. But if you still like doing bracket pools, I'm curious about the popularity of those. Because I know my personal bubble isn't necessarily reflective of society at large. Really curious if people still do that. But speaking of our text line, we did get an interesting text here during the break that I wanted to read. This is from Glenn from Columbia. He asked, why is Robbie Ashford playing in the bowl game even an issue if the transfer portal wasn't messed up and started after bowl games so that people didn't have to worry about these things, just wouldn't even be an issue? Well, I agree, Glenn. I mean, it's the reason this is an issue is because college football has its off season or its free agency period for all intents and purposes occurring in its postseason. Like all of the parallels that certain coaches are making and the analogies they're making that college football has, let me rephrase this. All the analogies that these college football coaches are making about this would be like if the NFL starts their free agency period and their NFL draft when the playoffs first start. It wouldn't make sense, right? Logistically, it makes zero sense. It doesn't make any sense for coaches to have to try to scout other players in the portal or at least in the NFL, to scout players that are potential free agents and then have to negotiate with that and try to get your roster set for next year while you're currently preparing for your NFC wildcard game, right? It does not make sense, which is why it doesn't make sense in college football. But there's one thing that makes this part of this evil, I don't want to say necessary, but there's one part about this that makes this college football, and that's that these kids are going to college. And the season ending in December and the next semester starting in January, you have to be enrolled to be able to practice, right? You have to be enrolled to be on these teams. That's the big thing. You have to be enrolled into school to participate. And I'm fine with that because, again, at the end of the day, this is college football. Everybody playing, even though if they're making money, must still be enrolled, whether they're going to class or not and failing them. I almost don't particularly care too much for, but you have to at least be enrolled in the school. And that's really the issue we run into here. And the big issue is, well, Elijah, sure, but they're not playing college football games in the winter semester or spring semester. Correct. But they're practicing in the spring semester. And there's a lot of college football coaches who hold some heavy emphasis on those spring practices, and they have a spring game every year. And that spring game, probably doesn't bring any revenue, but it's a display of what your team's looking like, and it's a final good practice to have. You get a certain amount of practices in the spring. Coaches like to use that to install offense, install defense, to be able to get some continuity together and get at least a really good picture as to what your team's going to look like next season. There's a heavy emphasis on that. And that's why there's the pressure for guys like Malik Murphy last year, Bo Prabula for Penn State this year, to have to hit the portal before playoff games, because they know that there's not going to be an FBS school that's going to go into next football season without their starting quarterback participating in spring practices. And that's where this gets really messed up. And that's where I really like my colleague Jay Phillips' suggestion that we move spring practices after the final exams of the spring semester. So kind of like in a way where you'd get a Maymester in college. Ironically enough, took a podcasting class as a Maymester when I was at Middle Tennessee State. Just a 1 month long class. You're cramming a whole course load into that month. I've had some friends that actually took hard classes as Maymesters, and they seemed miserable. And that's a them problem. I did not take any hard classes in Maymesters because I knew I wouldn't be able to handle that. But in a football sense, you can almost Maymester your spring practices by cramming that into a month, having a spring game at the end of the month. You have, 15 practices in the spring to be able to use out all in 1 month. And then on like May 30th, or maybe early June, have your spring, quote-unquote, spring game. I like that idea, and I think that's the one changeable thing because, again, it's college football. Guys can still be enrolled in your school for summer classes, so you can still legally have them practicing while being enrolled, and then doing it that way. Maybe that's not the perfect solution, but it's at least an idea, and I think that idea that Jay brought up on our show earlier this week might be the closest thing we can get to a common sense solution to avoid players that are on teams right now participating in the college football playoff getting into the transfer portal. Like the clip about that James Franklin had discussing this was, to me, almost kind of sad, right? Like he knew he didn't want to have to do this. Like he knew that Bo Prabula wanted to play in this game. I don't blame him at all. I would want to play in this game too, because look, it's not like Bo Prabula was a quarterback who only was going to play if Drew Aller got hurt. Bo Prabula had some packages for him. He was a part of that offense. The offense coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, had certain packages to put Bo Prabula in to take the snap and try to convert like a 3rd and short or a 4th and short. And it worked a lot this year. It actually ended up being a pretty beneficial package that Penn State had in its offense. He was going to see some snaps. Now, he's not going to see a ton of them in their game against SMU. He wasn't going to see a ton if they win that game in the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State in the college football playoff quarterfinal, but he was going to see some snaps. But he still had to make the decision because these teams want to have their starting quarterback in for spring practice. He had to make that decision. Do I play this and then risk not finding a place at all? Or go ahead, get in the transfer portal and find where I'm going to be a full-time starter next year, and a team can say, hey, you're going to be our full-time starter. They can recruit him to be the full-time starter. I think we could avoid that if we just maneuvered some things in the calendar. Move spring practices to after the spring semester. Maybe not have as much, put as much pressure on some of these high school guys even to reclassify or graduate early. Because a lot of them will graduate early just so they can participate in these spring practices. And it's beneficial to a lot of them, right? But then they can do it with everybody else without having to graduate in December or graduate high school early. Then they can join the team when everybody else joins the team. Or the high school players who are committed to you and are signed to play for you the next year, whenever they come up to play later, they can come up with everybody else in the spring. They can graduate. They can join your program after the school season ends and once spring practices start, they can enroll in summer school. It's a doable option, and it might be easier than having to reclassify or just enroll early and graduate high school early. It's a thought. But that's a really good question, Glenn. I appreciate you asking that. And we did get a text on our text line, Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Apparently there is an ESPN playoff bracket challenge. Don't know how I missed that. This is from Soda City Bobby, and he says, yes, I do poll pick and pulls every year. They shall never die. Bowl pick and pulls should never die. I still have a really good time doing those. And I have only won like maybe 2 in my life. Crazy enough. I've only won like 2 in my life. And I've been playing, every year since like 2003, 2004. I've only won a small handful. Not been my most successful fantasy sport or game by any stretch of the imagination. But I am taking a risk this year in picking college football playoff games because I do feel like we will see Notre Dame in the national championship game. And that's what I wanted to get to here in this segment, because there was a tweet from Pete Thamel last night that is making some news, as it should, because we saw what happened to Carson Beck in the last play of the first half of the SEC championship game. He's hit as he throws, his arm's rearing back to throw a Hail Mary into the end zone. He's hit as he throws, hurts his elbow, and is not able to return. He makes an appearance at the end of the game in overtime to hand the ball off so that I believe it was Nate Frazier, or it was Trevor Etienne. Yeah, Trevor Etienne. I get him and his brother Travis mixed up way too frequently. Was able to hand him the ball into the end, so he can go to the end zone, win the game. Georgia wins the SEC. But there was also serious concern that Carson Beck might not play in the college football playoff. This is a tweet from Pete Thamel last night saying, Georgia preparing for college football playoff without Beck. ESPN story on Carson Beck's future. And it's, as we expected, it is an elbow injury. And here's another, more on the thread at least. Georgia's preparing to play the college football playoff without starting quarterback Carson Beck, who is exploring surgery options to repair an injury to his elbow on his throwing arm, sources tell Mark Schlabach, Chris Lowe, and I on Thursday. Beck, who is considered a potential first-round pick in next year's NFL draft, was seeking medical opinions and hasn't practiced since he was hurt on the final play of the first half, is what you should say, on the SEC championship game. On December 7th, Beck's return this season is unlikely, according to sources, and sophomore Gunnar Stockton is expected to make his first college start in a college football playoff quarterfinal matchup at the All-State Sugar Bowl in New Orleans on New Year's Day. And yes, I saw what Georgia did against Texas's defense, and Texas has arguably the best defense in college football, and I saw what they were able to do in the run game. I saw what Gunnar Stockton was able to do in the run game and was able to connect on a couple throws. But I can't pick them to win it all. And yeah, I understand the Cardale Jones factor for Ohio State. Yeah, sometimes the third-string quarterback can go in there on a team that is that talented and it not matter, right? Don't turn the ball over. You're going to be in good shape. But this Notre Dame defense is for real. And, I can say that now. Watch Notre Dame win tonight and then go give up 41 to Georgia in the Superdome. And I'll be freezing cold taked, but whatever. I just don't see, especially with some of the struggles this Georgia offense has had against really good defenses. Carson Beck's a good quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but I do think this is a very significant injury to Georgia, and I don't think I'm necessarily going to take that second half against Texas as proof of concept that Gunnar Stockton can just step right into those shoes and be able to engineer enough touchdown drives to be able to win that game against a defense like Notre Dame, which is just, simply put, very nasty. Even the game they lost, Northern Illinois, they lost 17-14. It was a low-scoring game. Notre Dame's offense was the problem early on in the season. Notre Dame's defense is nasty, and that would be a very tough ask for anybody making their first career college football playoff start to, A, do it in a college football playoff game, to B, to do it against that defense. It's a really tough ask. We'll take your calls and read more of your texts, 803-404-6100. And also, something happened in Chargers-Broncos last night on Thursday Night Football that hasn't been done since 1976. I'll tell you exactly what that is when the postgame show returns.
So Dicker, 3 years now, solving Charger kicking woes for several years prior to that. Can he bang it through? On its way, it is. Yep.
Made history tonight.
Yes. There you go.
Yes, Kirk, that is history. That was the TV call. Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit walking you through Cameron Dicker, a.k.a. Dicker the kicker for the Los Angeles Chargers, bang home a 57-yard field goal. And it's not a traditional 57-yard field goal because this is a field goal that for the first time since 1976 was made as a fair catch kick. And that sounds really weird. A fair catch free kick, mind you. I wrote that down wrong. I left the free out. It was a fair catch free kick. Just an absolutely remarkable thing. And if you watch just the game with no sound and no explanation as to what's happening, you're going to get incredibly confused with what you're looking at. It's abnormal. It looks unnatural. But it's like watching a kickoff occur, a traditional kickoff, not the new modern-day NFL kickoff. A regular kickoff happened from the 50, but if the ball goes to the uprights, it's good. So here's the deal. Here's what happened. This happened last night in the Broncos-Chargers football game. There's about 8 seconds left in the half. 4th down. The Broncos, leading 21-10, have to punt the ball away. They punt the ball away, and there is a flag on the play. There was a fair catch interference that happened. The Broncos were penalized on. The flag advanced the ball to the Denver 47-yard line. And at that point, because that was the end of the half, and of course it can't end on a penalty, there is a rule in football that gives the team an option, if they accept the penalty, to be able to get a free kick from the spot of the advancement of the ball. So the penalty happened on the Chargers side of the 50-yard line, but the penalty would bring it up past the 50-yard line into the Broncos side of the 50-yard line, right? So then Jim Harbaugh, John coaches the Ravens. Jim Harbaugh elected to kick the free kick, an uncontested free kick, meaning it's just like the original kickoff rules, but there's no tee. You can't have a tee. So there was a holder, players to the right and left of Cameron Dicker, and there had to be 10 yards of space between the defense and the kicking unit. Almost kind of like a free kick in soccer. There has to be some distance between the one kicking the ball and the defense. And this is such a rarity. So many people like myself didn't know this was a thing. I didn't understand that this was a thing. The last time that one was ever attempted in the NFL was in 2019 when Joey Sly attempted it with the Panthers. And that game wasn't even in America, right? If you go back and watch that 2019 game, that was between the Buccaneers and Panthers in London. So the last time we even saw a fair catch free kick wasn't even in the continental United States. That was across the pond. It's happened very, very rarely. And we saw it last night. Cameron Dicker made it. Joey Sly in 2019 in London shanked it, missed it. That happened when there was a penalty committed on a punt from the Buccaneers to the Panthers. Panthers elected to kick, I think it was from like 63 yards for Joey Sly for his fair catch free kick. Missed it. I watched a compilation video on YouTube today where I found about as many as can possibly be found of fair catch free kicks from NFL games. And you'd be surprised at maybe the 6 or 7 that were actually, we have footage of. Maybe 6 of those were not remotely close. They were missed by a mile. I think the closest one that I saw on there was Mason Crosby attempt one in 2008 or 2009, where he was kicking from about 70 yards and was about a yard short. Had the direction. He kicked it center. It was just maybe like a yard short. But this one, Cameron Dicker made from 57 yards out. And ironically enough, I looked up who the last kicker to make a fair catch free kick was. And it was, ironically enough, a San Diego Charger. This one was from Ray Wersching in 1976. And, seeing a picture of Ray Wershing, you realize this guy is the ultimate 1970s NFL kicker. Single bar face mask, but a 5-star mustache. That is football in the 70s. So just wanted to share that. Before we get to my friend Jordan Kay from the state to talk more about the Citrus Bowl between South Carolina and Illinois, my man Andy called during the break and is on the line right now. Andy, always a pleasure, to have you call in. What's up, brother?
Hey, you were talking about the brackets and everything, the filling out the brackets, and it made me think of the what I call boards. Where you just draw numbers and put them across, and everybody chips in like 5, 10, 20, however much.
Oh yeah, it's like Super Bowl squares. My dad does that. My dad's never sports gambled a day in his life, but he will do Super Bowl squares every year.
Yeah, and this is 40 years ago, mind you. I'm young. I'm like 15, 16 years old. So I'm going off, but it's the situation that got me. I don't even remember the result, but the gist is this guy, his college roommate, one of his best buds was a running back, and it was the last game of the season, and they had a board, and he was going to make $500 with the score like it was, but his best bud, his roommate, was they were about to score, and he would have broken the school's regular season touchdown record.
Uh-huh.
So he was in a dilemma. He's like, $500 or my roommate and friend breaking the school record. He's like, and I don't even remember what happened. But under that, would you be a good enough friend, or were you like, yeah, I don't need the money. I want my man to get the school record, or you're like, I want the cash. So I'm just putting that out there.
Ooh.
And it was
okay.
You don't think it's like, yeah. So that was the situation. I don't even remember what happened. I just remember thinking though, it's like, what would I do? So I'll just hang up and listen and let you discuss that and see where would you go. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Andy. You have reached or you have tapped into a fun part of my human curiosity, and that is a good moral dilemma. Yeah, in this one here's how I would think about it. Right, if I was in the position that this man was, who had a chance to win $500, or a friend of yours is breaking a school record, I would just look at it as a win-win, right? Because you're going to win something one way or another. Yes, it'd be cool for $500. Also depends how broke I was. If I really needed that $500, like if this was like, oh, I could really help myself out with 500 big ones, then maybe I'm leaning towards like, hey, man, don't break the record. You don't have to break the record, okay? I'll buy you something, whatever, with $500. But, in the position I'm at right now, it's a win-win. I would just have to look at it as a win-win and more focus on what I gained as opposed to what I lost. That's also a personal life philosophy of mine too. Anytime adversity hits, and I don't want to get all too philosophical here, but it's just like a personal me thing, that if I am kind of presented with something like that and I know I'm going to lose something, but I also gain something, I try to focus more on what it is I gain as opposed to what I lost and find the value in what I gain compared to what I lose. So yeah, that's tough. That's tough, man. Andy, I appreciate that call because that is a very interesting dilemma. And I've never played Super Bowl squares or boards because I know in different places of the continental United States, we just call different things, different stuff, and by different names. I know back home we call it Super Bowl squares. I've never participated in that. I've had offers to. Because what I do every Super Bowl is I kind of like square away $50 for betting purposes. I don't bet a ton. But whenever I'm at a Super Bowl party, I kind of like to do that with people. So I'll put different bets on. One of which always, I do this every year. I put down at least $10 on the game to be tied at halftime because it's always like plus 500 odds. I could win $50. I win everything back if the game's just tied at halftime. And like the last 4 years, it's been dangerously close to being tied at halftime every time. I'm gonna do it 1 year. 1 year, I'm gonna do it. I'm going to be successful. It hopefully is this year, but we'll see. We'll see. Andy, thank you for your call as always. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. And when we come back, Jordan Kay from the state is going to join me to talk about the Gamecocks today that discussed playing in this bowl game, the elevation of Mike Shula to the offensive coordinator role, and a whole lot more from the South Carolina football program as you're listening into the postgame show right here on The Game. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways. Starting off with one that's got the two left lanes blocked on I-20 eastbound. That's over at Broad River Road near exit 65, so traffic moving very slowly through there. We also have accidents on Bauer Parkway at Harbison Boulevard, Forest Drive near Highway 12 and Percival Road, Highway 1 at Augusta Road, one at I-77, and then another accident on Highway 1 and Augusta Road between Rabin Road and North Chelsea Road. We also have accidents on Highway 262 near I-77 and Veterans Road, I-20 eastbound at South Carolina 277 and exit 73, I-20 both eastbound and westbound at Harbison Boulevard near exit 103. Continuing hour number 2 here of the post-game show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips in today. We got Jordan Kay from the state on the line right now, but first we have another special guest. We've been doing some tributes all day today, and then during my show yesterday, kind of honoring a really good friend of not just of the show, but of the entire station, and not just of the entire station, but of the entire fan base. As most of you know, Gamecock Larry passed away yesterday morning. The most memorable caller that we have had in the history of this station, the probably most beloved caller in the history of this station. So many people with so many wonderful messages of love and support, and your own personal tributes and favorite Gamecock Larry messages and calls and memories. And we of course, sharing that all day, too. We still have some text on the text line that I'll get to later on the show, 803-404-6100. We're also calling in. Right now, we have a very special guest before we get to Jordan, and that's Tanya. Tanya is on the line right now. She's Gamecock Larry's daughter, calling in to share a message with us. And Tanya, first of all, thank you for calling in. It's a pleasure to get to meet you. I absolutely enjoyed every time your father called in and got a real kick out of getting to go back and forth with him. Whatever he would call in on the station. He meant a lot to us. I know he absolutely meant the world to you. So thank you for calling in, and I really appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to get to meet you.
Thank you so very much. I just want to say thank you to everyone that has reached out, and this tribute to my dad has meant the world to me and my family. He was a very dedicated Gamecock fan. He loved every one of y'all. And like I said, I just appreciate all the prayers, the messages. It has really warmed our heart today. And continue to keep us in your prayers. And thank you all once again. I do want to say that anyone that wants to come to the funeral, his viewing will be next Friday, the 27th, from 6 to 8 at Thompson's Funeral Home in Lexington. And then his funeral will be next Saturday, the 28th, the 27th is the viewing, and Saturday the 28th at 11 will be the funeral at Thompson's. And I just appreciate 107.5 with all my heart, with everything that y'all have done for my dad and the way y'all have loved him and supported him. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Again, so on the 27th, the viewing, Saturday 28th, the funeral, and you said 11 a.m. At Thompson's, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just want to make sure I got that correct. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that information, and thank you for calling in. And I think we're all here at 107.5 The Game eternally grateful for the joy that your father brought all of us and our listeners as well. I mean, football season, basketball season, baseball season. If we played hockey here at the University of South Carolina, hockey season would not be the same without those calls. So we really appreciate you calling in, and he's definitely going to be missed. And it's definitely been, I can't imagine how hard it's been, but we're all definitely still thinking about you and praying for you here on this side. And very good to meet you personally for me for the first time. And thank you for calling in.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tanya.
Bye-bye.
So, again, as Tanya said, if you want any information on Gamecock Larry's visitation and the funeral, Friday the 27th will be the viewing, and then on the 28th at 11 a.m. at Thompson's will be the funeral for Gamecock Larry. So I expect that to be very well visited. So with that, we'll go ahead and pivot. I know Gamecock Larry would be absolutely thrilled to know that South Carolina is pursuing win number 10. And if they were to get it, then that one's for Gamecock Larry. And, well, and on that front, there was a lot of good news today with some proclamation about who is going to be playing in the Citrus Bowl on New Year's Eve. Jordan Kay from the State joins me right now. Jordan, thanks for calling in, man. A very busy week for you at the State with everything going on, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you and everybody else down in Orlando. But thanks for joining me on short notice today.
Heck yeah, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the big news of the day is who is going to play. We heard earlier in the week Kyle Kennard would not be playing. We saw a personalized message about Raheem Rocket Sanders, declaring for the draft earlier this week. I kind of took that as he's not playing, but he didn't rule it out specifically. But today on the defensive side of the ball, Nick Eamon-Wari, Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight, and Debo Williams all confirming that they're going to be playing in this game on New Year's Eve. How big of news is that for Gamecock fans?
Oh my gosh, it's everything for a program that, like you're saying, has only won 10 games 4 times in its history and has a chance to do that on New Year's Eve. To have basically its entire starting defense, aside from Kyle Kennard playing, is just massive for them. And then the Rocket Sanders thing, I was kind of with you. Like, I read it a couple times, and I'm like, I'm not really sure what this means. It's not like he had another year of eligibility left. So, yeah, I'm kind of taking that as he's not playing, but we'll see. Perhaps he could be playing, but right now it seems like, South Carolina's bring back most of its starting offense aside from him if that ended up being the case.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too. I think if I mentioned this in the first segment of the show, I think you will have won the battle of opt-ins and opt-outs with Pat Bryant for Illinois, the leading receiver, opting out of this game right here. I think he probably means most to Illinois' offense, even though Kennard's the Nagurski winner. This is a defense that is loaded with talent. In terms of who is not playing for Illinois and who is not playing for South Carolina, I feel like South Carolina probably has an edge in that.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was plenty of guys on the defensive line that aren't Kyle Kennard, but they're really good players, and they're going to be able to step up, especially when you have that entire defensive front still rushing the passer. You still have Dylan Stewart. They can probably throw in Brian Thomas or Desmond Umazulo, and they can be productive. They can cause havoc. It's not going to be Kyle Kennard, but they have sufficient players that can kind of back him up.
And one thing I wanted to ask you too, man, with the news of Mike Shula being elevated to offensive coordinator, he addressed the media for the first time as the Gamecocks OC. You spent a lot of time talking with Dowell Loggins this season and really getting to kind of be there for a lot of LaNorris Sellers' development as a passer, as a quarterback. Obviously, what LaNorris was the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, significantly different than what he was early on in the season. A big thing about making another OC hire would have been the continuity. How much do you think the continuity of keeping Mike Shula around, who was an analyst, who is in those quarterback meetings and in those film rooms, how big of a deal do you think that is to be able to bring him in and have somebody with that type of experience and play calling experience already in the room to just elevate?
I feel like the continuity was like 75% of the reason he was hired, or at least hired as quickly as he was. I mean, Shane Beamer said he really didn't consider anyone else, which is somewhat surprising. I don't know if, he would be able to say that about any other assistant coaching hire. And the continuity, like you're saying, is just massive for LaNorris. Okay, you come into college with one, you're recruited by, one or offered by one offensive coordinator. Then Dowell Loggins comes in. You commit to Dowell Loggins, and he's been your guy for 2 years. And now it's not really going to be a change. Mike Shula understands who LaNorris Sellers is, but bigger than that, he understands the offense, and he's going to be able to kind of hardly watch LaNorris Sellers, but hops on YouTube and hits the highlights and is like, oh my gosh, we've got the greatest quarterback ever to work with and all this. And Mike Shula, like his opening press conference, it was a little odd. I mean, he was like, well, Lenoris is good, but, all those great plays, he could have just got the ball out quicker. And, I mean, he was already, like, kind of going in on stuff Lenoris needs to work on. That surprised me. I was like, okay, like, Mike Shula is all about development. And, like, he was not, like, praising Lenoris, like, oh, my God, he's going to win the Heisman. It was like, well, he's got plenty to work on. He's young. I was like, whoa. So, perhaps that's a good thing. Perhaps that's what it's going to take for Lenoris Sellers to develop into an elite quarterback. Not to say he wasn't that, but, to take the next step in his game.
Jordan, can I implore you to stay for one more segment? I don't know what your schedule's like.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll round out hour number 2 with our guy Jordan K. from the state, talking Citrus Bowl, Gamecock football offseason, and a whole lot more. You're listening to the Postgame Show. Hanging out with Jordan Kay here to round out hour number 2. Jordan works for the state, covers the Gamecocks on the Gamecocks beat for them. We'll all be down in Orlando later this month for the Citrus Bowl, talking all things Gamecocks football and the offseason. I want to keep going again on Mike Shula and his elevation to being named the Gamecocks offensive coordinator. And one thing when I look at his resume, Jordan, the 4-year stretch that I look at and focus on a lot, in this offseason, I'm going to have to go back and watch a lot of these teams, is the Carolina Panthers 2011 to 2015, because he was the quarterback's coach for the Panthers when Cam Newton was drafted and was a rookie and was Rookie of the Year. A couple years in, he becomes the offensive coordinator, and then by 2015, they're 15-1. Cam Newton wins the MVP. The Panthers go to the Super Bowl. There have been some maybe, I don't want to say direct comparisons, because anytime you give a Cam Newton comparison to somebody, it's incredibly unfair, but there are some playing style similarities, I will say, between Cam Newton and Lenoris Sellers. How much of a plus do you think it is for Mike Shula to have that in his background to kind of help Cam Newton go from great college player to great NFL player while also being a coordinator to build the offense around him that for at least a year really maximized his strengths?
Oh, it's massive. I know that was a big part when Mike Shula was brought in, and Dow Loggins was really the guy who brought Mike Shula in. They had a connection or something, and that was why he got brought in. But no, I mean, like, I don't think these guys at South Carolina, I mean, heck, Mike Shula was saying even the dudes in the NFL, like, they don't know who his dad is. They probably don't really know that he was the coach of Alabama or anything. But all he's got to do to gain their kind of quick respect is be like, hey, I coached Cam Newton to a Super Bowl. And it's just a really quick, easy thing that is going to get any 18, 19-year-old's attention. That helps in recruiting. It also helps when Mike Shula's sitting in a room with Lenoris Sellers and says, hey, that's a lot of what Cam Newton used to do with the Panthers.
Oh, definitely. We got about a minute and a half here, so I'll go ahead and try to get your takeaways on what the Gamecocks have done in the transfer portal right now and what kind of direction do you think they're going to go once December keeps rolling along and we start to try to see what this roster looks like next year, replacing a lot of key pieces, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
It's clear their first priority was just beef up the lines. They got offensive linemen, they got a tight end, they got a defensive tackle, they got the linebacker. It seems like they're trying to beef up, get bigger, more depth in the front line, and then I think over the next couple weeks after the bowl game is when you're going to really start to see them kind of hone in on those skill guys. Maybe Justice Haynes, the running back from Alabama, who was on a visit today. Maybe there's some wide receivers they can add depth, in January as they did with Dale Von Campbell and Vandravius Jacobs. So it seems like right now they're trying to go after the interior, and then they'll spread out as time goes on.
Yeah, I think that's really the big thing for next year. I mean, you hit some home runs in the portal this past year. I think if they're able to do that this season with a lot of the continuity you're getting on offense, you're going to start off next year with a lot of hype and a lot of expectation. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Jordan, thanks for joining me for a couple of segments. Appreciate your time, man, and looking forward to hanging out with you guys and everybody else in Orlando. And before we get you out here, too, will your alma mater, the Arizona State Sun Devils, do they shock the world and beat one of Texas or Clemson in Atlanta?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, ASU, yes. I think they've had a tougher schedule than both those teams. So
might not be wrong, actually.
I can't remember. Maybe not Texas after the SEC title, but hey, ASU's on a hot streak right now. They played good teams. They beat good teams. They got the rest. ASU heading to the semis, calling it.
I love it. Jordan Kay from the state. We'll be back. Hour number 3 next. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways, but I'll start off with some good news. And that good news is that the accident on I-20 eastbound at Broad River Road near exit 65 that had a couple lanes backed up has been cleared. But we still do have some other accidents that are causing some issues, like one on Bower Parkway at Harbison Boulevard, one on Forest Drive near Highway 12 and Percival Road, one on Highway 1 at Augusta Road at I-77, one on Highway 262 near I-77 and Veterans Road, one on 20 eastbound at South Carolina 277 near exit 73, and lastly, one on 26, both eastbound and westbound at Harbison Boulevard near exit 103. Final hour of the post-game show, and as we always do, thanks to our friends at Integrated Media, bring you the 5 o'clock news. Have all types of news today, including a final score from a bowl game. If you're in a bowl pick'em pool like I am, and you picked Ohio for the first game today, because we have several college football games on the docket. But if you picked Ohio like I did, then congratulations, my friend. You are 1-0 to start the day. If you did not, then condolences. Ohio wins the Cure Bowl down in Orlando by a score of 30-27 over Jacksonville State. Your MAC champions get to end the season on a win. And right now we have, with about 55 seconds left in the second quarter, down at the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl, Florida leads Tulane only 6-0. This one, I figured Florida would drop the hammer on Tulane pretty well because Tulane has just had an awful end to the regular season, got beaten over the head with a bag of hammers in the AAC championship game against Army. They really kind of stumbled down the stretch, had a loss against Memphis that really kept them from being in college football playoff contention, because if you remember, they were high enough in the college football playoff poll or rankings towards the end of the season to where an AAC championship would really make a legitimate discussion to be had between them and Boise State as to who would be that group of 5 member, or maybe if they were to even leapfrog the Big 12 champion. But alas, it did not happen because Memphis took it to them, and then a couple weeks later in the AAC championship game, Army took it to them even worse. But Florida up only 6 with 25 seconds and counting left. Looks like it's 4th and 6, Tulane ball. They're in Florida territory, but not far past the 50. It looks like. So we'll try to get some points on the board before half here. That game is currently going on. Tonight we'll be making a little bit of history. For the first time, we'll have a college football playoff game played on a school's campus, and that is going to be at Notre Dame at 8 o'clock tonight on ABC and ESPN. Indiana and Notre Dame will be playing, and then tomorrow we have a full slate of games, starting with one at noon. Penn State and SMU on TNT or Max. And then at 4 o'clock, Texas and Clemson in Austin, 4 o'clock, also on TNT or Max. And then at 8 o'clock, Tennessee travels to Columbus to take on Ohio State in that 8-9 game. That game's going to be on ABC/ESPN. So a very exciting, busy day of football coming up tomorrow with some significant implications. Other news, I mentioned this earlier in the show. There is some news on Georgia's quarterback front for those who watched the SEC championship game and remember. There was a play where Carson Beck was hit as he threw, really on a Hail Mary attempt in the last play of the first half. Injures his elbow, and then a report from Mark Schleybaugh, Chris Lowe, and Pete Thamel came out last night saying Georgia is, quote, preparing to play the college football playoff without starting quarterback Carson Beck, who is exploring surgery options to repair an injury to the elbow on his throwing arm, sources told ESPN on Thursday. And Gunnar Stockton came in and played really well in that second half against Texas and helping lead them to an SEC championship win. And in doing so, gave them a bye in the college football playoff, and they will take on the winner of tonight's game between Indiana and Notre Dame next week in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. But what we do know is that it is a long shot for Carson Beck to play at all. And when they say surgery, well, makes you kind of wonder, speculate if it's a UCL thing, if the surgery they're discussing is maybe Tommy John surgery. I don't know, but it didn't look really good on that elbow. And if surgery is required, then I think it's an absolute no-go that he's going to play. What that does to his draft stock is another interesting question, too. Our pal Craig on our YouTube stream did ask that very same question. He's like, there's talk about Beck being the first pick. Didn't have a great season. Now with this injury, do you think his stock plummets even more? I think so. Maybe. But then I think if he gets to the second round, somebody's going to be willing to take that flyer on him because it's going to be a cheaper option, and you don't have to commit as many years to the deal with a second-round pick. And if you have some type of quarterback contingency plan, then it's low risk, low reward, relatively speaking, for a quarterback. Maybe he falls to the second round if he has to have surgery. There's a lot of things that can happen. We'll see with Carson Beck, but more than likely his career at Georgia is over because I still expect him to declare for the NFL draft. I do believe he still has at least a year of college eligibility remaining. So it's something to keep an eye out for moving forward. In coaching carousel news, now this is definitely one coaching carousel tidbit that I was not really expecting to see during this coaching carousel cycle. This is from Norfolk, Virginia, a report at Norfolk State officially named Mike Vick. Yes, the former Atlanta Falcons and Philadelphia Eagles and Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Michael Vick has been named as their next head football coach. This was on Friday, the latest hire. This is from the ESPN and Associated Press report. It's the latest hire of a talented NFL player with no college coaching experience to lead an HBCU program. Now, the previous ones are Deion Sanders at Jackson State, Eddie George at Tennessee State, and Ed Reed at Bethune-Cookman. And obviously it worked for Deion at Jackson State. They won 2 SWAC championships, lost to both opponents, South Carolina State and NC Central, in their 2 Celebration Bowl appearances, but he did still win conference titles. He then goes to Colorado, and we've seen what he's done there at Colorado since. Not as much success with Eddie George at TSU. However, they did share an OVC and Big South championship this year, and he was named the Coach of the Year in that dual conference, the Big South and OVC, just because they don't have a ton of teams that play the sport. They do kind of have combined forces and are basically playing a dual conference, and Tennessee State won a share of that this season, and Eddie George was named the Coach of the Year in that league because of his efforts. But today, Michael Vick is going to join that list of former players to coach at HBCUs as the head coach, despite any actual college football coaching experience. We'll see how that one goes. Norfolk State has had an interesting history. And we'll see exactly what Michael Vick's got. If it brings into the program a lot of talent they wouldn't normally get, I think is really the selling point whenever these type of moves are made. As somebody who covered Eddie George being hired at Tennessee State, that was certainly the biggest factor, right? The biggest factor was having somebody who was beloved by the area. And Eddie George was certainly beloved in the Nashville area. And Michael Vick is certainly beloved over in Norfolk, Virginia. He is from the area. And having a big name that can bring in recruits because they want to play for that athlete. Now, I don't know how many athletes today that are high school football players, prospective college football players that remember watching Michael Vick growing up. It can't be a lot of them, at least not prime Michael Vick, because the best version we ever got of Michael Vick was when I was a kid. And I know I am definitely out of all types of college eligibility. But if the name still carries weight and can bring in talent, then at least it's a starting point for a school like Norfolk State, and we'll see. I'm always skeptical of the hiring of coaches who have no experience. I was even skeptical of Bill Belichick going to North Carolina because he does not have any real college football experience. And it's just a different world, man, between college football and the NFL. Some other Gamecock news. Now, this was some free agent baseball news. Former Gamecock legend, champion Christian Walker, has reached a 3-year, $60 million deal with the Houston Astros. Now, Christian Walker was one of the biggest name free agents. He's really done a fantastic job playing with the Arizona Diamondbacks the last few years. He he's coming off of a Gold Glove winning season with the Arizona Diamondbacks and played on the team that went to the World Series just 2 years ago against the Texas Rangers. This is from a report of Alden Gonzalez on ESPN. He says the Houston Astros and free agent first baseman Christian Walker have agreed to a 3-year, $60 million contract. Sources confirmed to ESPN amid multiple reports on Friday. The deal is pending a physical exam. The addition of Walker in all likelihood marks the end of Alex Bregman's tenure in Houston, not to mention the Astros' ill-fated attempts to pry Nolan Arenado from the St. Louis Cardinals. So the Astros have attempted to make some big splashes in free agency. This is the one they were actually able to land. So Gamecock legend Christian Walker has reached a 3-year, $60 million deal with the Houston Astros. And, of course, the last thing here on our 5 o'clock news segment, brought to you, as always, by Integrated Media. I want to revisit one more thing in case you missed it in the last hour. I talked about a little history that was made last night.
So Dicker, 3 years now, solving Charger kicking woes for several years prior to that. Can he bang it through? On its way, it is. Yep.
Made history tonight.
Yes. There you go.
Last night we saw our first made fair catch free kick in the NFL since 1976. I feel like that has been the storyline of that game, not the actual implications of the game, because there was a lot on the line. This wasn't like watching the 3-10 Jacksonville Jaguars play against the 3-10 Tennessee Titans, right? These are two teams between the Broncos and Chargers that are going to be in the playoffs, or potentially both of them in the playoffs. I think they both make it. And the Denver Broncos and Chargers having the same record. The win for the Chargers, a 34-27 victory over Denver. Sorry, Jay Phillips, gives them a leg up in the tiebreaker status. So if they were to finish the season with the same record, the Chargers would have the tiebreaker over the Broncos. They would finish second in the AFC West. And of course, it does feel like, for all intents and purposes, the Kansas City Chiefs, I think they've wrapped up the division. I can't remember if they've wrapped up the division or not, but they pretty much have, because they're like 13-1. There's 3 games left. It would take a colossal meltdown, I think, if that were the case. And I think by virtue of just the Buccaneers beating the Chargers last week, that probably sealed the fate for the Chiefs to be the division champions. But either way, the Chargers will be second in that division and have a tiebreaker if it gets down to that. And if there's a tiebreaker between those teams and there's a last playoff spot, and if any craziness happens in the AFC, Chargers get that win. So there was a lot on the line last night. But the one thing everyone's going to remember is the first made fair catch free kick since 1976. And for those who don't know how weird, how rare this is, this just happened when a fair catch interference penalty happened by the Broncos when they were up 21-10 in the last play of the first half. And by rule, if there is a penalty on a fair catch interference on the last play of the half or a game, a coach does have an option to attempt a free kick. And you don't see that a lot in football. But to attempt a free kick, which means there is no attempt to block the kick, no rush on the kick, and it almost looks like a normal kickoff where teams are lined up, the receiving team being lined up 10 yards away from the kicking team. But in this instance, there's a holder, there's no tee, and the ball is aimed to go through the uprights, and it can be scored on. And that's what happened last night. Cameron Dicker, the kicker for the Chargers, bangs home a 57-yarder on the fair catch free kick. It's the first time that one of those has even been attempted since 2019 when the Panthers' Joey Sly did it against the Buccaneers in a game in London. So if you haven't seen a lot of those and had no idea what the hell was going on last night, well, I don't blame you, because it's certainly not something that happens every day. But ultimately, Chargers win 34-27, and now they are in the driver's seat to be number 2 in the AFC West and maybe improve their playoff position in the wild card here for the next few weeks. We'll go ahead, take a quick break. We come back. There is some big Gamecock news as well regarding who is going to be playing for South Carolina in the Citrus Bowl down in Orlando on New Year's Eve. I'll tell you that, the good news, and a whole lot more talking Gamecock football when the postgame show returns. Stay tuned this hour, because here soon it could be this segment. It could be the next segment. I will give you a cue to call for tickets for Sunday's game, men's basketball game against Radford. That's going to be Sunday at 2 o'clock. You can just stay home and watch it on ESPN+, or you can wait, hear my voice, give you the cue to call, be one of the first 5 callers, and you could have tickets. It sounds pretty cool, but I have to give you the cue. That's not me giving you the cue. Got to wait for me to give you that cue to call. So keep listening in throughout this hour, and you can find yourself with some seats to watch the Gamecocks play, coming off of a thrilling win, mind you, a massive win against a Clemson team that, I firmly believe, is a top 3 team in the ACC. That's a team that's going to get their way back into the top 25 at some point this year. So that's a quad 1 win and a big win against a rival under your belt, and one that, has to give you a little bit of confidence. A little bit of confidence that you can get into conference play in the SEC, which is the toughest conference in America, by a country mile right now. Especially considering this league just went off of we're 3 weeks into December, and they're 50-4 overall. Just insane. An insane record by the SEC. The entire conference is in the top 66, or at least 68 now, in Ken Palm's adjusted efficiency rating. The road's going to get much tougher. But you got to feel better about them, especially after that win against Clemson. But they play Radford on Sunday at 2 o'clock here at Colonial Life Arena. I teased in the last segment that there was some big news with this Gamecock football team regarding who is going to be playing in the Citrus Bowl. And, of course, college football now, and in the modern day, there's a lot of opting out, transfer portal stuff, who's playing, who's not playing. That's usually the story with every team going into their bowl game, is who's going to even be available. And when you're making your bowl picks for your bowl pick'em pool or whatever it is, when you're going to a game or going to watch it on TV, you're always kind of looking at rosters and be like, all right, who's actually going to be playing in this game? We already found out earlier in the week that from Shane Beamer himself that Kyle Kennard declaring for the NFL draft and not going to be participating in the Citrus Bowl. And earlier today, with some press availability, we heard that Nick Emmanwori, Boogie Huntley, Demetrius Knight Jr., Debo Williams, and Tonka Hemingway all confirmed that they will be in action on December 31st, taking on the Illinois Fighting Illini in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, which is fantastic news for the South Carolina team, especially considering I feel like you've won the battle of the opt-ins and opt-outs, because Illinois' best offensive weapon, Pat Bryant, will not be playing. He has opted out because he will be entering the NFL draft. Their leading receiver is easily, without a doubt, their number 1 option on this team. That's one less weapon for Luke Altmaier, and he's already behind an offensive line that has been prone to giving up pressures at times. And Luke Altmaier, a quarterback who has been prone to almost make some mistakes when he's under pressure this season. Actually, on PFF, hasn't thrown any interceptions under pressure, but he has thrown for about 6 turnover-worthy plays, and his passing grade is very low. Has not made a ton of plays when pressured. I think there's a good chance South Carolina can get to him, and one of those reasons is Demetrius Knight. Look, Demetrius Knight, one of the players that's opting in to play in this game, was talking about his decision to play. And I'm really fascinated to hear what he has to say. Demetrius Knight's perspective as a college football player is significantly different than most college football players. I don't know what the percentage would be, but when I watch college football games, I imagine most of the players don't have children of their own yet, right? You're in college. I am 29 years old. I do not have any children. If I was playing college football, I would not be. I would not have any children. My friends in college did not have children, right? A lot of these guys that you watch aren't fathers yet. But Demetrius Knight already is, and you could tell that some lessons that he wanted to teach his children was one of the reasons that he declared for the NFL, or not for the NFL draft, declared that he was going to play here in this Citrus Bowl. Here's a clip from Julia Westerman. She is a sports anchor reporter at WIS. She tweeted this out earlier today. I found it to be a pretty interesting clip. Here's her clip of Demetrius Knight earlier today in the press availability, talking about his decision to play in the Citrus Bowl.
Just to finish the right way. Finish what you started. I have kids, and I didn't want my daughter or my son to be like, oh, why why didn't you play in the last game? And I'm like, I didn't feel like it, or I felt like I would get injured. I don't want to give them an excuse, if they feel like they got to finish homework. Oh, I felt tired. I didn't feel like doing it. You did it, Illinois, and then I got to live with that. But no, I want to show them how to, finish what you start. When you start it, finish it, and that's a good quality in a person.
Demetrius Knight, says if you start something, finish it. And he would like to play in this game just to set an example for his children. I find that pretty admirable. And again, I want to preface this by me saying this. I am in no way disparaging the decision that Kyle Kennard is making not to play, right? I don't blame him at all. And if anyone needs any excuse or any reason to look at as to why he shouldn't blame somebody for making that decision, look no further than former Notre Dame linebacker Jalen Smith, who played in a bowl game in a non-playoff, it was an old BCS bowl game, played in the Fiesta Bowl in 2015 against Ohio State and had one of the more gruesome injuries you can see on a football field. Was never the same again. He still got drafted in the second round, but he was projected to be in the first round. So by that measure, you're already losing out on money. So he's losing out on that money of being a first-round pick because of the injury. He was never the same, so his career never what it could have fully been in its entirety and its potential. And if he doesn't play that game, who knows? Maybe he is a perennial All-Pro in the NFL. For insert franchise here. The Dallas Cowboys were who eventually drafted him, but I don't think he ever fully realized his potential, and I think that injury had a lot to do with it. I think Terry said the other day, almost anything that ends in an L was torn. And it hurt his draft stock significantly. So I don't really blame anybody for missing out on these games. I can't at all. But I also, at the same time, I respect guys who like Demetrius Knight, who want to finish what they start. And I feel like that's human nature too, right? Is to realize that you're having fun where you're at, and that the time that you have with your teammates, the time that you have at the school, and just playing college football in general is limited. It's very limited. And right now, their season ends in 11 days. At this time, 11 days from now, their season will almost be over. They'll be like a quarter away from finishing. I think there's a lot of realization in that room that they've had a really special season. They're trying to make history, be one of only 5 teams in the history of this school to win 10 football games in a year. I think there's a lot of that recognition, and there's a realization that time is short, and to try to experience as much of this as you can with your teammates, because they do seem like they're really close. I'm not in the locker room, but I've been around the team after games and in press conference settings, talk to people around the program. And it does really seem legitimately that they enjoy each other. They enjoy playing on the same team. They enjoy being around each other. They enjoy leadership qualities. They've really banded together, and you have to be that banded together to be this good. To win your final 6 games and do it in the manner in which you did, you have to be really good. You have to be a tight-knit unit, and it seems like they really are, and that's the type of experience that you come to play college football for. And I definitely don't mind that, somebody might want to protect their NFL draft status. I also certainly don't mind that somebody wants to maximize the experience that they have of playing college football before they reach the next stage of their career professionally. 803-404-6100. That's our text line, our Firehouse Sub text line. It's also the phone number that you need to call right now. Be one of the first 5 callers. And if you are, you have tickets to Sunday's men's basketball game against Radford at 2 o'clock. Again, 803-404-6100. You are listening to the Postgame Show. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways, starting with one on Burgess Road at Highway 17 South, one on Corley Mill Road at North Lake Drive and Highway 6, one on Hardscrabble Road at Clemson Road, one on Highway 6 between Crockett Road and US 76 and Dutch Fork Road, got one on Killian Road at I-77, another one on Park Terrace Drive between Bower Parkway and Harbison Boulevard, and lastly, one on US 176 at Broad River Road near Beatty Road. Time to take a drive around the SEC. Of course, we have all types of stuff going on in the Lord's Conference, including some college football playoff games. This weekend, the 12-seed Clemson Tigers will be traveling to Texas to play the 5-seeded Longhorns in a game in which the winner will take on Arizona State, the Fighting Jordan Kays, if you will. Our guest in the last hour, who is an Arizona State grad, already calling a shot, saying that Cam Scattaboo and the Fighting Kenny Dillinghams will defeat the winner of that game. I love his optimism. I don't know if I see it, though. I think Texas beats Clemson. I think Clemson can keep it close till late. I do think we might have a chance for a backdoor cover. The biggest hang-up that I have on this game is Clemson's ability to be able to score consistently. I think Texas will be able to stack field goals. I think they'll be able to at least get 1 or 2 touchdowns. I think we'll see Texas in the 21 to 24 point category. I can also see Clemson maybe being held to 10. Texas's defense, top to bottom, probably is the best in college football in terms of the defensive line, linebackers, secondary, the combination of everything. I feel like that probably is the best defensive unit in the sport right now. My biggest question in this game is, can Cade Klubnik and that Clemson Tiger offense just be able to manufacture enough points to be competitive in this game? I'm leaning no. I mean, South Carolina's got a great defensive line, and they, at certain points in that game, they were able to get the stops they needed. Now, credit to Clemson's offensive line. I think they played the game of their season against South Carolina in terms of at least keeping the pocket clean for Cade Klubnik just long enough for him to be able to make the passes he did. I mean, Cade Klubnik did have a good day through the air because I don't think he was as pressured as I expected him to be in that game. But against Texas, man, that's a defensive line on par with South Carolina and maybe a smidge better. There are pros up and down that defensive line, including Trey Moore, who kind of underachieved a little bit at the beginning of the year, has really picked up steam late. Vernon Broughton on the interior defensive line is a bad, bad dude. And I have a really good feeling that they are able to have their way against Clemson in the game. That would be tomorrow again at 4. And then Tennessee's going to play at Ohio State. In terms of popular upset picks, I don't think there's a lot of people taking underdogs in this format for these games. I haven't seen a lot of people predict SMU to beat Penn State. I haven't seen a ton of people pick Clemson to beat Texas. I certainly haven't seen a ton of people picking Indiana to beat Notre Dame. And I'm not seeing a ton of people picking Tennessee to beat Ohio State, but I am seeing it a little bit, and I'm picking Tennessee as well. I feel like there has to be at least an upset somewhere, because I feel like there's going to be a game that truly shows why this thing is necessary, and that's what I'm going to end the show on here in the next segment is what type of game am I talking about here? I think we're going to get something that's going to really show why this thing needed to expand to 12, the same way we had a game show why we had to expand to 4 and get a playoff to begin with. And the Tennessee-Ohio State game can be that game because I think it'll be a thrilling game one way or the other. I have a hard time seeing one team blowing out the other because there are flaws on both teams, right? Ohio State's flaws are mental right now. We heard Joe Rexrode, who joined me in the first hour from The Athletic, who is very well connected in both SEC and Big Ten circles. I mean, he was on the Michigan State beat for a long time, and so he still has some Big Ten connects. And the people he talks to in the Big Ten or that are within the Ohio State fan base are incredibly dejected. They are incredibly dejected at losing to Michigan. And I don't blame them for being down. I do blame them for maybe throwing away any hope for the rest of the year because you still have the most expensive roster in college football. And you still have one of the best teams in college football. And if you had beaten Michigan and you rematch at Oregon, if you lost to Oregon again, I would still feel like this Ohio State team is one of the best rosters in the country. But you'd feel like the season's over with how they've handled this. And that in the offensive line. Mentally, how up for this game is Ohio State? How up is Ryan Day? Has he recovered from the shell shock that was that loss to Michigan? Has this offensive line recovered from the injuries they've sustained? Seth McLaughlin has not recovered. He will be out for the rest of the year with his injury. Starting center, who they got from Alabama last year. And then they're also on their third left tackle. They've had injuries at both tackle positions. This is an offensive line that's incredibly banged up, and they're playing a nasty defensive front in Tennessee. I almost have a hard time seeing Ohio State put together scoring drives that end in touchdowns. I think they'll be settling for field goals. I think they'll turn the ball over a couple times, and that can be catastrophic. And then for Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava has to grow up a little bit. We got to see some big boy football from him. He's going to have to hit some downfield throws because the opportunity will be there. There has not been a team in college football that has seen almost lighter boxes than Tennessee just because of how their offense is. It's spread across the formation. You have receivers that are almost hugging the boundary, right? As close to stepping out of bounds as possible. But by doing that, it forces teams to kind of show their hand, and a lot of times to avoid getting beat deep and avoid the space that Tennessee's receivers are creating to beat them. You'll see teams that Tennessee face present lighter boxes, right? Fewer players that are in the area to play the run, which is one of the reasons why Dylan Sampson's had a fantastic year. Now, Dylan Sampson's a fantastic running back, so I don't want to take that away from him, but the offense does pave way for you to have a great day on the ground at any given day against any given team. And Dylan Sampson scored over 20-plus touchdowns this year and broke a single-season record for that school with rushing touchdowns because of this. Is Ohio State going to be willing to stack the box and try to take Dylan Sampson away from Tennessee and make Nico Iamaleava beat them through the air and with man coverage? If that's the case, then Nico's going to have one-on-ones on the outside. He's going to have some open receivers down the field just because of how well they route design. He's going to have opportunities to beat Ohio State over the top. Does he connect on those? That's a massive question mark, a major question mark in this game. I think he can hit on one or two. And if he hits on one or two, I think that can provide the big play explosive spark that they needed, because that's exactly how the Alabama game went, right? Alabama was the better team that first 2.5 quarters. Nico couldn't hit a pass 10 yards down the field, and when he finally connected on a couple, it created the amount of scoring drives they needed to win that game. So that's why I think Tennessee probably squeaks out with a win against Ohio State, and is our first real upset in this new college football playoff format. A couple of transfer news and notes, especially within the SEC. Kendrick Law, former Alabama wide receiver, had a solid year for the Tide this year, was in the transfer portal. On 3 reports that he has signed with Kentucky, so he will be a Kentucky Wildcat. Florida picks up a really big addition in the transfer portal. That's from UCLA transfer J. Michael Sturdivant. He was one of the best wide receivers, best pass-catching options for UCLA, an offense that was up and down this year. But J. Michael Sturdivant joins a Florida wide receiving crew that I expect to have Eugene Wilson back again next year. So you have a good 1-2 combo, and a quarterback in DJ Lagway, who is having a phenomenal season. He had to fill in once Graham Mertz got hurt, tore his ACL against Tennessee. He was out for the year, and DJ Lagway proved that he's the quarterback of the future, and he was worth the money they gave him at NIL to commit to Florida at this time last year. And then in terms of potential players in the SEC. We've talked a lot about Bo Pribula, the Penn State backup quarterback, who would have had a little bit of a role in this game against SMU tomorrow. But Pete Nakos from On3 reports that Bo Pribula currently visiting Central Florida and will visit Ole Miss tomorrow. Ole Miss may be having their replacement for Jackson Dart, potentially in Penn State's Bo Pribula. And lastly, in terms of transfer news, Zach Calzada back in the SEC for a third time. For those who might be saying, wow, Zach Calzada, that sounds familiar. Well, because Zach Calzada has played quarterback at Texas A&M and Auburn, and then got back in the transfer portal again, spent this past year at Incarnate Word, a school in the FCS that has been known for putting up some wild and wacky passing numbers. This year, he's thrown for 3,744 yards and 35 touchdowns. He is committed to Kentucky. So Kentucky gets Kendrick Law from Alabama at wide receiver, and they now get Zach Calzada, a quarterback from Incarnate Word. Kentucky once again digging back into the transfer portal for what is now, I believe, the third straight year, because Calzada this next year. You had Brock Vandergriff last year for a 1 year, and then you had Devin Leary the year before that on a 1 year. Had Will Levis for 2. He transferred from Penn State. But there might not be a school that embodies the quarterback rental system of the transfer portal more than the University of Kentucky. Their next guy in line is Zach Calzada. And then, of course, the news last night, broken by Pete Thamel and ESPN, as well as Chris Lowe and Mark Schleybaugh. It is not expected for Georgia quarterback Carson Beck to participate in the college football playoffs. Georgia is operating as if he will not be playing in the playoffs. Gunnar Stockton will be making his first career start in the Sugar Bowl, taking on the winner of tonight's game between Notre Dame and Indiana. We'll round out the show next here on the Postgame Show. I'll answer the question, which game I feel like is going to be the reason that we are able to justify a 12-team playoff, the same way a certain game justified the 14 playoff back 10 years ago. We'll discuss that when we round out the show next. Final segment here of the post-game show. I'm Elijah Campbell not in for Jay Phillips because it's my show too, but no Jay Phillips today. And there won't be Jay Phillips next week either. So you're stuck with your boy for a while. But for the final segment today, there was something I really wanted to get into, and it's regarding this 12-team playoff format. Tonight, we're going to make history at 8 o'clock whenever Indiana and Notre Dame take toe to leather, and it becomes the first ever college football playoff game played on somebody else's campus. I think we'll get a game here in this playoff run that proves the necessity of the 12-team playoff. And I think it isn't the only thing that's proved the necessity, right? I think Florida State getting left out of last year's college football playoff is proof alone that we needed to expand this thing. Florida State winning every game in the regular season and then winning their ACC championship game despite the injury to Jordan Travis, who broke his leg late in the season last year, and getting excluded from it, I think did some minor damage to the sport. But that damage could be rectified because the next year was when you were going to play a 12-team expanded college football playoff. So that way a team that wins their conference at 13-0 wouldn't be excluded because, look, now we have teams with 3 losses winning that same conference and getting into the college football playoff, even though they wouldn't have sniffed it if they didn't have that auto bid. And that's Clemson. But there will be a game that proves why we have this. The same way that in 2015, on New Year's Day in 2015, Ohio State with third-string quarterback Cardale Jones beating number 1 Alabama in the Sugar Bowl and hanging 42 points on them to beat them, mind you, is to me one of the most important games in the history of college football. One of the most important upsets in the history of college football. We're going to think back on that team and remember the national championship win against Oregon where they beat Heisman winner Marcus Mariota and did so in convincing fashion. But I think the most important game was the win they got before that in the college football playoff semifinals against Alabama in the Superdome, because that showed that a 4-team playoff format was way more necessary and way more beneficial to the sport than the BCS national championship game, which was just the 2 best teams according to the Sagarin rankings, picked by a computer and plopped down in the last day of the season and enjoyed by many. Now, we had some great BCS national championship games. I'm not mad at that. I still really enjoyed the 2006 Rose Bowl between Texas and Southern Cal. To me, that's one of my favorite college football games in history. I think that Auburn-Oregon national championship game, the one that Cam Newton won with that Auburn team, was one of the greatest college football games I've ever seen either. It was a really fun football game. We've had a lot of classics in that regard. There were some duds, but we also had an overtime game between Ohio State and Miami back in 2003, in January of 2003. A phenomenal football game. And people for a long time were kind of hesitant to the idea of a college football playoff. I was one of those. I was a very curmudgeonly 18-year-old boy who kind of figured you didn't need a playoff because the 2 best teams always play each other anyway, and then we're just going to get blowouts. But the playoff provided a platform for a team like Ohio State, who had to not just win their Big Ten championship game, remind you, had to win in convincing fashion. They beat Wisconsin 59-0. They had to run the score up in that Big Ten championship game for them to be considered to be in the college football playoff. They're on the outside looking in. That could have easily been Baylor or TCU in that spot. But it was Ohio State because of how they beat Wisconsin in that Big Ten championship game with Cardale Jones at quarterback, because J.T. Barrett and Braxton Miller both went down. Your top 2 quarterbacks not available. Third stringer Cardale Jones comes in, does what he does in that Big Ten championship game, and you can't ignore what happened. They put him in. Ohio State beats Alabama. The rest is history. We're going to get that this year because I think Penn State beats SMU, but Boise State, who Coach Spencer Danielson said today that they are going to wear their white jersey, blue helmet, orange pant combo they've won in every Fiesta Bowl. He said they're going to wear those. Boise State's going to beat Penn State and prove that the G5 belongs as a seat in the college football playoff. I'm Elijah Campbell. Enjoy the football this weekend. I'll talk to you on Monday.